Welcome back to Eject Media. Tonight we're going over another lineup of overlooked horror from 1980, from cult favorites to pure late-night cable chaos. If you love deep-cut genre picks from the VHS era, you're in the right place. Stick around and let us know your favorite from this list in the comments. Nightmare City, 1980. A news helicopter tracks a mysterious aircraft as it makes an unscheduled landing, and within minutes, the situation spirals into full-scale panic. What begins like a contained emergency quickly spreads across hospitals, television studios, and city streets, turning everyday locations into danger zones. The film wastes no time getting to the chaos, moving with the kind of urgency that defined a lot of fast-paced European horror at the dawn of the VHS era. Instead of slow, shambling threats, the attackers here are aggressive and relentless, giving the movie a frantic energy that rarely lets up. Director Umberto Lenzi pushes momentum over explanation, stacking one crisis on top of another so the story feels like a rolling disaster report that keeps getting worse. The synth-heavy score drives that feeling even further, adding a constant pulse under every chase and confrontation. The lead performance brings a grounded, boots-on-the-ground presence, following the outbreak from one hotspot to the next as order collapses. There's a rough-edged, exploitation-style intensity to the action that makes the film feel dangerous and unpredictable, especially compared to more polished studio horror of the same period. This is pure late-night tape horror. Loud, messy, and packed with set pieces. The kind of movie you discover on a worn rental copy and remember for its sheer, unstoppable momentum. Motel Hell, 1980. Farmer Vincent runs a quiet roadside motel and sells popular smoked meats to the surrounding community. The business is thriving, though no one asks too many questions about where the meat comes from. Along with his sister Ida, Vincent captures travelers from the nearby highway and keeps them buried in a hidden garden, alive but silenced, until they're ready to be processed. The routine holds until Vincent saves a young woman from a staged accident and decides he doesn't want her to share the same fate. The film plays its premise with complete seriousness. Rory Calhoun gives a surprisingly restrained performance as Vincent, presenting him as polite, soft-spoken, and unsettlingly sincere. He believes in what he's doing, which makes him more disturbing than a typical villain. Nancy Parsons leans harder into the grotesque as Ida, whose loyalty to family overrides any sense of morality. Paul Linke appears as Vincent's sheriff brother, offering an uneasy contrast to the rest of the family operation. One image defines the film: victims buried up to their necks in the soil, unable to move or call for help. It's simple, uncomfortable, and memorable. The effects are minimal but effective, relying on performance and framing rather than excess gore. Even the more outrageous moments, including the chainsaw-heavy finale, are staged with practical weight that keeps the danger believable. Motel Hell balances horror and dark humor by refusing to undercut itself. The absurdity is never acknowledged on screen, which allows the premise to remain unsettling instead of playful. It's a strange offbeat entry in early 80s horror, quietly nasty, occasionally funny, and built around a villain who feels disturbingly ordinary. Fade to Black, 1980. A lonely film fanatic lives almost entirely through the movies he watches, measuring the real world against the characters and stories playing on his screen. When personal setbacks and public embarrassments pile up, fantasy starts to bleed into reality, and performance becomes his way of coping. And then something more dangerous. The hook is built around classic cinema obsession. The main character recreates iconic looks and personas from old films, turning familiar Hollywood imagery into something darker and more personal. It gives the movie a layered appeal, part character study, part genre thriller, and part love letter to film history. The lead performance carries nearly every scene, balancing sympathy and unease so the character never feels one note. You understand his isolation even as his choices grow more extreme. The Los Angeles setting adds to that feeling, bright, crowded, and yet completely impersonal, making his disconnect feel even sharper. Tonally, it shifts between dark humor and psychological horror, which keeps it unpredictable. References and visual homages reward movie-savvy viewers, while the central descent story keeps the tension moving forward. This is a standout VHS-era oddity, not a creature feature or standard slasher, but a media obsession thriller that feels tailor-made for film fans digging through cult catalogs. He Knows You're Alone, 1980. When the slasher wave first took off after Halloween, countless filmmakers rushed to put their own spin on the formula. Among the earliest was He Knows You're Alone, a film that found its audience on late-night TV and in the video store aisles thanks to its eerie premise, a killer stalking brides-to-be on the eve of their weddings. The story follows a young woman whose upcoming marriage is overshadowed by the feeling she's constantly being watched. Soon, the quiet suburban streets and bridal shops become hunting grounds for a faceless menace. The idea of tying matrimony to mortality gave the film a unique hook that stood out from other slashers, flooding the market at the time. Caitlin O'Heaney carries the lead role with vulnerability. But the film is most often remembered today for one reason. It marked the screen debut of Tom Hanks, who shows up in a small role and steals his brief scenes with the charm that would later make him a household name. Though not as polished or influential as Halloween or Friday the 13th, He Knows You're Alone carved out its place in horror history as one of the first imitators to make it to theaters, and later, the rental shelves. For fans of the era, it's a time capsule of that moment when slashers were brand new, raw, and finding their voice. Death Ship, 1980. A nighttime collision at sea leaves a handful of survivors stranded, and their only refuge is a massive black freighter that appears out of the fog like a floating graveyard. Climbing aboard feels like rescue at first, but the ship quickly proves to have a history and a will of its own. Corridors, engine rooms, and cabins become a maze of bad discoveries. The film plays like a haunted house story set on open water. Instead of creaking doors and dusty halls, you get steel passageways, echoing bulkheads, and mechanical groans that never seem to stop. The setting does most of the horror work, turning isolation and confinement into the primary weapons against the characters. Veteran cast members bring authority and realism to the survivor group, grounding the supernatural angle with practical decision-making and rising frustration. As control slips away, leadership conflicts and stress fractures start to show, adding human tension alongside the ghostly elements. Visually, the movie leans into stark imagery and ominous symbolism tied to the ship's past, giving it a grim identity that sticks with viewers. It's a strong example of contained location horror. One cursed place, limited options, and the growing certainty that leaving won't be easy. A perfect pick for fans of nautical nightmares and slow-building dread. Blood Beach, 1980. Something beneath the sand of a Southern California beach is dragging people underground, leaving behind scattered belongings and streaks of blood. A detective investigates the disappearances as local officials argue over whether closing the beach during tourist season is worth the panic it would cause. As the attacks spread from isolated areas to crowded public spaces, it becomes clear the threat isn't in the water. It's directly underfoot. Jeffrey Bloom directs a creature feature clearly influenced by Jaws, but relocated to land. John Saxon leads as the investigator with worn-down authority, while David Huffman and Mariana Hill provide a personal connection to the early victims. Burt Young plays a skeptical police captain more concerned with optics than safety. The performances stay grounded even as the film leans into familiar B-movie rhythms. The creature is mostly unseen, attacking from below. Sand erupts, victims are yanked underground mid-step, and brief glimpses of tentacles suggest something large and predatory beneath the surface. Even in the climax, the threat remains only partially visible, relying on implication rather than a full reveal. The beach setting works well, wide open, impossible to secure, and dangerous precisely because it feels safe. Blood Beach is modest exploitation that delivers a simple hook and sticks to it. It doesn't reinvent the genre, but it understands how to build tension through denial, delay, and environment. A cult oddity best enjoyed by creature feature fans willing to trade polish for atmosphere and a clever twist on familiar territory. The Unseen, 1980. A trio of reporters travels to cover a regional festival, expecting a light, human interest piece and an easy stay. But their lodging choice turns out to be anything but comfortable. The house they check into feels wrong from the start, with strange rules, tense hosts, and a sense that certain parts of the property are off limits for a reason. The film builds its horror through discomfort and delay. Instead of rushing to spectacle, it lets awkward moments stretch, and questions pile up. Conversations feel loaded, pauses feel deliberate, and the tone suggests that everyone knows more than they're saying. That slow burn approach gives the eventual reveals more weight. The performances sell the unease, especially from the homeowners, whose polite exterior never quite hides their anxiety. Small behavioral details, forced smiles, sudden mood shifts, defensive reactions create a steady background hum of threat. You're always waiting for the situation to tip over. Visually, the old house setting does a lot of the heavy lifting, with narrow hallways and shadowy rooms reinforcing the sense of confinement. Best described as slasher adjacent with a mystery core, it's a lesser-known title that rewards patience. For deep-cut horror fans, it's exactly the kind of tape-era discovery that sticks because of its mood. Schizoid, 1980. A newspaper advice columnist dealing with a messy separation begins receiving disturbing anonymous messages, while members of her therapy group start turning up dead. The connection seems obvious, but the film keeps introducing new angles and suspects, turning every counseling session into a potential clue. Set against a gritty urban backdrop, the movie blends slasher mechanics with psychological thriller structure. Group therapy scenes become interrogation chambers in disguise, where shared secrets and personal grudges float to the surface. The question isn't just who's responsible, it's who's hiding what. The therapist is played with intense, offbeat energy, giving the character a magnetic but unsettling presence that keeps viewers guessing. Supporting cast members, including a few recognizable genre faces, add texture to the suspect pool and help sell the fractured group dynamic. The direction favors suspense over spectacle, using stalking sequences, threatening notes, and a signature cutting weapon to create identity without relying on elaborate effects. The pacing keeps tightening as the circle narrows, pushing toward a final stretch built on paranoia and misdirection. This is a solid example of early 80s psycho-slasher style, grounded, mean-edged, and slightly sleazy. The kind of thriller that feels right at home in a late-night horror lineup. Hell of the Living Dead, 1980. A top-secret chemical operation goes wrong, and the fallout doesn't stay contained for long. A recovery team and a group of journalists head into the affected region, expecting a controlled mission, only to find that the situation has already moved beyond anyone's ability to manage it. From there, the movie turns into a forward march through abandoned zones, hostile encounters, and mounting dread. The approach is raw and fast, built on urgency rather than polish. Director Bruno Mattei assembles the film with a grindhouse rhythm, quick scenes, sharp turns, and constant forward motion, giving it that unmistakable shock cinema feel. It's less about careful logic and more about escalating danger, with each new location presenting another threat or complication. One of the standout elements is the driving electronic score, which adds scale and intensity to the action and helps glue together the film's many moving parts. Combined with on-location shooting and chaotic crowd sequences, it gives the story a bigger footprint than you might expect from its budget. What makes it memorable is its relentless tone. There's very little safety once the team enters the hot zone, and every decision feels like it comes a step too late. For fans of scrappy, high-energy outbreak horror, this is a prime example of how far pure momentum can carry a movie. The House on the Edge of the Park, 1980. A small upscale gathering becomes the last place anyone wants to be when two uninvited guests force their way into the social circle. What starts as tension and discomfort steadily escalates into a locked-in night scenario where control shifts back and forth, and every attempt to calm things only makes them worse. The film keeps its focus tight, turning one location into a pressure chamber. The direction leans heavily on atmosphere and unease. Long stretches of awkward interaction are allowed to breathe, making every sudden outburst land harder. The camera often lingers just a little too long, letting the mood turn sour in a way that feels intentional and confrontational. It's exploitation-era filmmaking designed to provoke reaction, not comfort. The central performances are the engine. The lead antagonist is played with volatile charisma, unpredictable, taunting, and always pushing boundaries, while his partner adds a jittery, unstable edge that keeps every scene off balance. Together, they create a constant sense of threat, even in quieter moments. Best framed for modern audiences as a controversial home invasion shocker, the film's reputation comes from how far it pushes its premise and how committed it is to sustained dread. It's not a casual watch, but it is a memorable one, and very much a product of boundary-testing early 80s horror. If you love discovering forgotten horror and cult cinema, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the films time forgot. Thanks for watching, and remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.